Everyone hear me now? Just recently, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a report that found that we as a global society have approximately 10 years to drastically cut our carbon emissions, or we're setting ourselves down a path of terrible and potentially irreversible climate change. It's a future that's almost certain to be hotter, less stable, and considerably less prosperous than the reality that we enjoy today. Now, if you've at all followed the climate conversation in the United States, you might be thinking to yourself, why? Why are we still dealing with this? If we have known about climate change for over 50 years now, and we have all these solutions on hand that even little kids can name, why are we as a society and as a country still dealing with this? Or more accurately, why have we not yet dealt with this? Now, upon hearing that, you might have already had an answer in mind to that particular question. Partisanship. In the United States, climate change as a topic is so mired in political partisanship that to mention the words climate and change in the same sentence in some places is considered political poison. So you don't. And this national level leadership divide is often typed into an urban and rural divide as well. Urban areas being considered the places that are concerned about climate change, who are interested in the solutions, and who are very eager to move forward. Rural areas, on the other hand, are considered the places that, if we're concerned about climate change at all, are uninterested in solutions and are actively attempting to hold us back. However, I'm from a rural and conservative area here in Missouri, and that black and white look is not necessarily what it looks like on the ground in conversations with ordinary people. A lot of people in rural areas are concerned about climate change. They want solutions, and they want, just like everyone else, to be able to stop worrying about climate change. However, in the United States, we have a divided narrative. Urban areas have benefited from a narrative that basically says they have a lot to gain from adopting climate change solutions. While in rural areas, we've basically been told we're trading one cost for another, that climate change solutions are incompatible with rural life in America. So in order to move forward, we must unite this narrative. We must shift the narrative in rural areas from one of cost to one of opportunity for all of us. So in order to do so, we must first touch on what the present narrative is. And I think it's kind of a twofer. Damned if you do, damned if you don't, and individualization. So first, damned if you do, damned if you don't. It's the progression of a climate conversation that has moved from outright denial to basically our leadership and political commentators for rural areas telling us that, sure, climate change might be happening, but whatever benefits will accrue in the future from not having climate change will pale in comparison to the economic suffering we'll bring upon ourselves. Essentially, suffer now, suffer later. And who wants to start suffering now when you know it's already going to hit you later? No one. So you don't talk about climate change in rural areas. Now, the individualization portion is by no means unique to rural areas. In many ways, it's an American value to uphold the ideals of the individual. We place a lot of emphasis, however, in rural areas upon individual responsibility and individual choice. The problem with individualizing a massive and global problem like climate change is that it doesn't work. If your only solution to tell someone that is concerned about climate change is to essentially just tell them, slap some solar panels on their roof, park a Prius in their driveway, and oh, you should probably get ground source heating for your home, you're ignoring the fact that, one, the vast majority of emissions come from a handful of corporations, and two, those options that I mentioned are not even an option for so many Americans, especially those in rural areas. If you're concerned that your farm is going to go under in an unfavorable market, or making that next payment on your car, or even putting food on the dinner table, living paycheck to paycheck, you do not have the luxury of thinking that, hey, that Prius is going to save me money a year down the line. You're living in the moment. Now, that damned if you do, damned if you don't individualized narrative that has had a stranglehold on rural America has essentially ensured that people don't want to think about climate change, much less talk about it. Because who wants to think about a problem that there seems like there's no solutions and it's utterly terrifying? No one. And so in order to move forward, we must shift that narrative and shift it to one of opportunity. And the way to do so, I believe, is in many ways speak to the anxieties and experiences that people are already having. And because a lot of the criticism of climate change solutions center around economics, today I'm going to give you the 4 Ps, because everyone loves some good alliteration. So potential, professions, practicality, and politics. These are ways you can shift the conversation to one of opportunity. Now first, potential. The United States is blessed with an abundance of natural resources, and renewable energy resources are no exception. Now, I'm certain you're thinking, yes, the Southwest. Clearly, that's where the solar industry is going to locate. Kansas, Iowa, Illinois, pretty windy. Yeah, definitely plant some windmills there. But here's the thing. There's a lot of untapped potential. Just for instance, Missouri state government website on energy actually points out the fact that Missouri is a better solar resource than Germany, a country that has one of the highest per capita investments in solar energy technology. We're actually a comparable solar resource to Florida. And out of all 50 states, we are number 6 in the nation when it comes to solar energy potential. And yet, according to the US Energy Information Association, we get approximately 80% of our energy from coal. Talk about a lot of untapped potential. Now, the second part of potential comes from the fact that rural areas actually have a pretty strong advantage over urban when it comes to deploying a renewable energy technology economy. Quite simply, it's because an acre dedicated to solar in a rural area is considerably cheaper than one dedicated to solar in an urban area. Land costs are considerably cheaper, and so the initial investment is considerably lower, which makes it less of a barrier. Now, we've established that the potential is there. Let's talk about professions. In recent years, employment has been a major concern for people in rural areas. We've felt increasingly left behind as we're reliant upon a shrinking number of industries. A downturn in any particular market could spell disaster for a rural community. And I know that there's a conversation going on that basically says that there's a war on traditional energy jobs. But did you know that in 2016, the Department of Energy released a report that found that even while it produces only a fraction of our national energy output, solar had more than twice the number of jobs coal did? Furthermore, a Brookings Institute report from that same year found that for people without a college degree, jobs in the renewable energy sector pay higher than average median salaries, meaning it's a great investment to boost your middle class. And finally, states who are investing heavily in renewable energy technology make themselves that much more attractive to 21st century employers, because corporations are increasingly looking to green their image and say that, hey, we source the majority or all of our operating energy from renewable sources. Instead of being left behind, rural areas can be prepared for jobs in the 21st century. Now, we've established potential, we've talked about professions. Let's talk about practicality, because that's something that you hear a lot about in rural areas. It's a value we uphold quite religiously. I kind of like to frame this with a quote from my great-grandfather, who is a farmer here in Northeast Missouri. He liked to say that a poor man can't afford to buy cheap. And to be frank, by keeping ourselves married to the fossil fuel energy economy, rural areas are buying very, very cheaply. This has to do with the fact that we are increasingly the last to get infrastructure investments. So our increasingly old, aging grid is increasing costs for consumers because it's very inefficient. Furthermore, it's increasingly vulnerable in the face of extreme weather and natural disasters. A renewable energy economy that's decentralized basically ensures that we bring the infrastructure investment to us, so we get those efficiencies, and consumers are paying less. And of course, if your community is producing energy for itself, tailored to your community's needs and wants, you don't have to be nearly as reliant upon a grid when a storm hits. And as an added bonus, if your particular region is producing an excess of energy, you can be an energy exporter and essentially get paid for your investments. So the practicality is there. So I've talked about some things that are kind of economic in perspective. But let's touch finally upon politics, that most tricky of subjects when attempting to talk about climate change. Because a lot of people associate the words climate and change with the words government and regulation. But the thing is, a lot of the solutions to climate change don't even require an increase in the size of government. Actually, some of the most promising, like carbon taxes, would require no increase in government size whatsoever, because we could use the existing tax infrastructure to essentially put a price on carbon. So instead of you getting taxed for moving the economy in a greener direction, you put a price on the extraction of fossil fuels. Now, you might be thinking, taxes, rural areas, definitely incompatible. But here's the thing. Carbon taxes are very popular amongst conservatives and economists, not only because it's a free market and efficient solution, it requires no increase in size of the government, but because it has a second portion, a dividend plan. A lot of the carbon tax plans include a dividend portion where essentially the proceeds from the collected tax would be returned to the American people on a completely equal basis. So just recently, the Baker-Schultz plan was proposed by the Bipartisan Americans for Carbon Dividends. They estimate that the average family of 4 in the United States would receive approximately $2,000 a year in returns. So essentially, this ensures that the working class and the poor are not harmed by moving our economy in a more efficient direction. Now, I've given you the 4 Ps, but what do you do with them? Well, first and foremost, shift the way you think about climate change in your head, from one of an intractable, terrifying problem to one that brings with it a lot of opportunities. Because I know how scary it is. I am part of a generation whose lives will be defined by the actions we take in the next 10 years to deal with climate change. But it is so much easier to think in your head about how this is an opportunity for us. And because it's easier for you to think about it, it's easier for you to have a conversation with neighbors, with family, with your elected officials. And you don't even have to mention the words climate change. You can say, hey, these solutions are a good deal for rural America. Let's start implementing them. The United States has benefited as a country from being united by a common narrative of the American dream. The idea that tomorrow can be better than today, if only we seize the opportunities presented to us. Climate change doesn't have to be any different. If we are united around a common narrative, the idea that we all of us, have more to gain than we have to lose from adopting climate change solutions, we are bringing to bear the might of the American people. And we all know that we are stronger together than we are divided. This is an opportunity for all of us, and let us all seize it. Thank you.